I love you, man.
I love you too. Here we go. What's up, guys?
What is up? You did it.
I did it.
Success, victory, yay, take it early.
Right?
Yes.
The most seamless I've done the introduction, and it wasn't seamless, but once I got it going, it was.
It's
usually
perfect.
I forget to turn off the RRL logo full screen before the video's done. So instead of going to us, it goes to the logo, but I shut it off beforehand this time.
You rock, Jason. You
Thanks, man.
rock.
Brett is running late, so I'm your interim producer guy.
The co-host extraordinaire, that's for sure.
And we have with us a special guest tonight, Peg O'Connor. Sounds like LC did some little stalking research, whatever you want to call it. So why don't you introduce Peg?
Oh, wow. Put me on. That's right. What's up? Well, let me tell you, I did do some YouTube stalking to find out who Peg O'Connor was, because Brett was so excited to share with us. And as soon as I saw that Peg O'Connor is an author and a philosopher and has written this amazing new book, and I'm just going to let Peg tell all about it, but I'm super excited to be here because this is my jam. Peg is my jam, and I'm super excited to have you. Thank you so much.
No pressure here. None pressure whatsoever. Thanks, Elsie.
None.
That is a warm welcome for sure.
Welcome. That felt very warm.
Welcome, Peg. Peg is my fellow Minnesotan.
That's right. I'm about probably 75 miles south of you. So watch out for the Minnesotans when we get together. We're in trouble.
That's right.
So I see Elsie has passed the buck to me to introduce. That was very well done. That was very smooth, putting it over onto me. So I'm Peg O'Connor, and I'm an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic for a good long time. And I'm just tickled to be here. So Elsie said that I was a philosopher, and that is true. Please don't hold that against me. I think philosophy has so much to offer people who struggle with addiction and other forms of suffering, and with the possibilities for recovery, because philosophy has always grappled with questions about the meaning of life and making sense and identity and responsibility. I mean, that's all the bread and butter of philosophy. So I'm just grateful to, get to bring philosophy to people struggling with addiction and recovery, and to learn from people struggling with addiction and recovery. So, I've been a professional philosopher for about 28 years now, and I can go to pointy-headed academic conferences and, hear lots of stuff that I don't understand. And I can go into rooms or connect up with other alcoholics, and I hear some of the most philosophical questions and thoughtful responses that far outstrip what I hear in an academic conference. So, what I just want to say is that I think addicts ask deep, meaningful questions because addiction is really a problem of living and trying to figure out how to not just survive, not just to live, but how even to flourish. And we get to do that work in recovery. I mean, how magnificent is that?
Absolutely. I know when I went to college, I took a philosophy class, and I was super into it. Like, I didn't think going into that it would have been that interesting, but it was like very, very great conversations, and people sharing ideas, man, like different ideas. And I liked that because a lot, how often do you get to do that without it being like an argument or something? You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely right. And what I found teaching for a good long time now is I think that a lot of so I teach at an undergraduate institution. A lot of 18 to 22-year-olds really do want to have discussions, deep discussions, and they want to engage with these kinds of questions. And in my classes, we hardly use any technology. And we discuss and we read, and it's face to face, and your peers' names, and you build off what they say. All those skills that are getting lost, or at least getting covered by so much having to do with technology and social media, that I think young people today are hungry to learn skills that we who are older, I'll make no judgments about how old you all are, but certainly for me, that was just part of being in school, was you did those things. And it's not so much anymore. So I'm a throwback. I'm, set the Wayback Machine if you're a Fractured Fairy Tales Sherman and Mr. Peabody fan. Set the Wayback Machine, because there's so much value in learning how to talk to people, even or especially where you might disagree with them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's, you mentioned deep thinkers and people in recovery, and you think a lot of people use substances to numb. And so deep thinking, sensitive, like those are traits that a lot of people in recovery or even in active addiction have. They numb so they don't have to feel, because sometimes when you think and you try to figure out the world, it's painful.
Right. And when you get into recovery, now you're asking those questions because those are the same very questions that you were trying to avoid.
Before.
Or you answered them in some not productive kinds of ways.
Right.
And so now you've got the opportunity to hit the rewind button and maybe be able to understand what you were asking in the first place, so that you can come up with new, different, or better answers.
Yeah. It makes me think of like an X-Men sort of a scenario, like when I was numbing pain and numbing trauma, I had no idea at that time that was really going to be my superpower. And it was just so big, and all of that was there that I couldn't handle it. So I would, numb and try to escape. And it's like in recovery, I've come around to be able to believe and understand that it's like, now I know how to use my power. Now I know how to use this for, to live a better life and to know I deserve it, because that's that other part of that higher power sometimes question is, we think that if we remain guilty and low, then we make amends. That's how we're making amends. And it's learning to harness that power of forgiveness. And, I don't know, that's just what it seems like to me. And I think our greatest minds are in recovery rooms and in recovery programs, because you're right, Peg. This is what we do. I mean, to live a better, healthier life, these are the things that we have to, do and move towards.
Right. And especially if you're trying to help other people find recovery, whatever that looks like for them, you're definitely, faced with that, trying to help them find purpose and meaning in their own life. So I think it's changing all the time, like what we're learning about those questions anyway, because what that looks like for me is probably different than what it looks like for you. And it's awesome to see those lights come on in people and the various ways that happens. It's just, it never ceases to blow my mind.
Oh, I think that's right. And to either have fires ignited for the first time ever, to have never, maybe if you started drinking or using really early on, where you never got the chance to develop as a thinker or as a feeler, as a social person. And then to realize, well, that's what you can start to do in recovery. And that's what we do for each other. I mean, we share the commitment to helping each other try to stay sober. So there's feeling these things anew, or you've lost them through your addiction. And then when you get them back, and oftentimes when you recover something, when something returns to you, you fully understand the value because you know what it's like to live without it. And you think, well, I never want to do that again. And that's, I think, what keeps a lot of us going. We don't want to go back because we've lived that way, and we see that we weren't living fully, that we were only partially living, or that our drug and alcohol use or engaging in other addictive behaviors, that really burned at our center. And it made us lose other things that are so important to us, but we don't even recognize it. So the philosopher Kierkegaard, one of my favorites, so kind of melancholic Danish philosopher in the mid-1800s, he said that the greatest hazard of all, losing the self, can happen so quietly that you never notice it. So you'd notice if you lost $5, he said, you'd notice if you lost a wife, but you don't notice that you have lost yourself.
Yeah.
And that's one way to understand addiction for many of us. And the trajectory might vary depending upon how old we were when we started. But sort of we all land at that same point of we've lost ourselves because we've lost self-trust. And what we think we know about ourselves, we think we've got, the perfect perspective on ourselves. And what we know about ourselves is it's all bad or awful. I'm just a total loser. I'm a screw up. I use people. I waste opportunities. We think we've got the full 360 view of ourselves. And it's so partial and it's so incomplete. But for us, it feels like, well, this is the truth of us. So we lose self-trust. We lose self-knowledge. And the one thing that we can't ever do is forgive ourselves, particularly when we're actively using, because we keep kind of putting all of our mistakes and our misdemeanors on the plate of the scale, and that boom, that arm just keeps slamming down because all the weight is on the side of I'm just a dirty, rotten, stinking loser, screw up embarrassment to my family. Oh my gosh.
You know what blew my mind when I first started in this process was when I learned that self-loathing is an extreme version of self-centeredness. Because it didn't feel like it. It felt like I was like a piece of shit, right? It didn't feel good. Like I guess I would have thought that self-centeredness would be like ego or like I'm better than other people, but it was the opposite. And like apparently that's even worse ego. That's so crazy.
Well, I think it's kind of masquerading, or it's deeply undercover, because I know for me, as my addiction progressed, I pulled more and more into myself, that my world kept shrinking. So that really was all about me and my colossal screw ups. I mean, my deeply embattled, that I disappointed my parents, and that not a good sister, and I was wasting educational opportunity. I had no career. It was sort of me, in part because I was no longer capable of imagining anything different or better. The only thing I could imagine was how things were going to get worse. And even then I could surprise myself by how they got worse. So fact can be stranger than fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah. It becomes like this there's this never ending path of almost enlightenment as we go further into the battles of addiction, and how it does come back to self-loathing and so much. And I think that the way you're talking about this is such a natural progression and a natural step that almost anybody, regardless of what phase you're in, from beginning to to years on down the line, can gain it can understand it and wisdom of what's being said. Because I think that you talked about that, Jason, and one of the biggest freedoms that I found was also kind of in that, and that I could write a different story. That no matter how much I believe, that's why I always believed it just takes a spark of hope. Like you just have to see a flicker of the room to know that it's not total darkness and there's something else over there. And it doesn't even take that much. And so, it's just a natural step of healing that we're talking about. Just
Dude, I'm starting
natural.
to get pumped already because I can feel that this is just going to get super deep tonight. And I like that. Like, let's really like work those brain muscles, and
Yeah.
I love that. So you said you've been a teacher of philosophy for how long?
I think 27 years. I try not to do the math.
I think.
I want to maintain willful ignorance on how many years I've been teaching, but it's more than that because I started full time in 1995.
Okay.
So yeah,
it's a long
but
time.
it's great. It's wonderful because I am always surrounded by young people, 18 to 22-year-olds, and I was just having this discussion in one of my classes where there are so few spaces and opportunities for different generations to meet. We really do live in a society that's segregated by age. And that's very unfortunate because I think different generations have so much to offer each other. And I know that we live in a culture that is terrified of aging, and we're terrified of old people because we know we're going to get old. And we are so shortchanging ourselves from engagement with them and what we might get in terms of learning from them. And the other way around too. I mean, I can't tell you how many people ask me, so what do you think of this new generation of students? They come in with all these stereotypes about Gen Z students. Oh, they're lazy, they're entitled, they want everything without working. It's like, oh my gosh, you really don't know them at all. If you spend any time with them, you realize they have very legitimate concerns about sort of the status of the planet. They're deeply worried about financial matters. And I have students who are working full-time and going to school full-time. They are doing things that back when public education was better funded, students didn't have to work as many hours or as many jobs. And a good summer job now might not even cover the cost of your books. So, and these students are the ones who have gone through all of their education with active shooter drills. I mean, I'm going to look at you, Elsie, and say, you and I were probably stop, dropping, and rolling as we were covering our heads from the nuclear bombs from the Soviet Union.
Yeah. How old do you think I am?
Well, I can't tell because you have a hat on. So I'm just.
I got a bald spot back in the back,
yeah.
But you can't tell from the front. So I like looking at myself in the mirror.
There you go.
I pretend that I'm not going bald.
What about me? You can see me. I don't have a hat.
Well, okay. So I'm going to out myself here. I'm 57. So
I'm 49.
Okay.
49 this year.
43, almost.
Yeah.
I'm 38.
Okay. So clearly I'm the elder stateswoman here. But I mean, and students are struggling with mental health issues in ways that I have never seen before. We have, and this is true across higher education, so I'm not saying anything particular about my school, but I see so many students who come in with dual diagnoses, depression and anxiety, ADHD. We're seeing more bipolarism, more borderline personality disorder, and faculty tend to be some of the most regular sustained contact that we have with students. And so I ended up buying the short abridged version of the DSM-5, so the Psychiatric Dictionary of Mental Illnesses, to figure out how does this manifest with students in our classes, because the students who are really struggling are really, really struggling. And on college campuses, the students who are drinking more and in more dangerous ways. And a lot of them are smoking pot. Marijuana, cannabis, I guess we're supposed to call it now, enjoys a reputation of being, harmless or not as bad. And wow, to try to point that out to students that, well, given where your brain is developmentally, if you're going to start smoking pot, please wait until you're over the age of 25. And a lot of them say, but I do it for my anxiety. It's like, well, actually, it's probably going to contribute. So, I'm surrounded by young people who are struggling in all these kinds of ways. And that's one of the ways it stays real for me. And students are dealing with a lot of trauma. I'm teaching a special topics class on philosophy and trauma, and that class filled up about on the second night of registration.
Wow.
So our students, our young people are carrying such heavy loads. So it's no surprise that, in certain demographics, we see addiction rates just really accelerating. It's not surprising.
Right.
Wow.
Well, and I think a lot of people think, COVID was the reason, and that just maybe accelerated it. But if you think back to, like, I'll go back to my childhood. I was, in school, I think, so September 11th was when I was in 9th grade. Columbine, I think, was when I was in 8th grade. So school used to be the place you went that you were safe. And then, your neighbor, like when I was in middle school, you started to be able to look online and find out the sexual predators in your area, and you were able to see how many were there. So instead of going outside and playing, parents kept their kids inside, and then you started to, you still did recreational sports and you'd go play, but it was all planned and scheduled. So if you think about starting at that age, your ability to be on your own and get back home, when it's dark, and just those simple things that you don't think about aren't being taught. And then people are scared to go in their neighborhood. They're scared to go to school. And is it any wonder why, as that time goes on and those people become parents, that they pass those fears on and those traumas and those anxieties on? And it's just, as we become more fearful of everything around us, it's going to continue to get worse.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm so grateful for this insight. I have a 23-year-old son, and he's always been my whole world. My reason I used him as my reason to get into recovery really changed, because I wanted to teach him that you can change anything at any time and never give up on yourself. And I see all of these things that both of you are talking about, in him, and just having a conversation like this helps me see it in a whole different way, because it's easy as parents to think, what do these kids have to worry about? And you're so right. You're right. They have a lot, and a lot's going on. And just listening to Ashley talk, how different it was in my childhood, where we did not stay inside. I mean, I think my generation was the first where single working moms, it was a big single working mom thing. And so, we had started being independent and getting yourself home on time and all of that stuff. But the rest, we had hurricane drills and, fire drills but the rest of that stuff, I just could have never had the opportunity to see it from a different level or a different side without having conversations like this that mean something.
And there's that intergenerational component, though. So how much is lost because people of different age brackets aren't talking to each other?
Absolutely.
It's really different worrying about a hurricane than it is someone's coming into a classroom with, with a semi-automatic weapon that really should only be in the military.
Right.
So, just all those kinds of fears. And I think Ashley's right. I think there's this wonderful concept from an American writer in the mid-19th century. His name is Horace Fletcher. He was part of the Mind Cure movement, which is going to morph into Christian Science. But before that, he talked about fear becomes the dominant feature for a lot of people in their lives. And he says, forethought, which is being circumspect and being planful, thinking in advance, looking at, if I do this act, here are the 3 consequences. If I do that act, there are these other consequences. He says, fear starts to overwhelm forethought, and it creates, I love this expression, fear thought, that your thinking begins in fear and tends to lead to greater fears.
Right.
And fear is the opposite of optimism or of hope. So I think, to go back to, this question about addiction, where many people drink to numb, I think many people drink to try to manage fears and anxieties. And that might be an adaptive strategy for all of about 2 minutes or for a very short amount of time, but it quickly becomes maladaptive. And so that fear thought is the accelerant in developing an addiction, I think. And so then everything, where you can imagine possibilities, you become a savant, you become a world-class champion in imagining the worst case scenarios. That fear thought just now pushes your imagination only in one direction. And that's always the worst case scenario. And so if you can't imagine things being better, you can't hope for what you can't imagine.
Right.
And that's one of, the casualties of addiction, is that it fundamentally squashes our abilities to imagine and hope in ways that are positive, to have positive visions that you long to meet. I mean, most people might start to think, well, that's just ridiculous. Someone like me could never do that. Or that's just a stupid waste of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's going to keep us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they did a study, and they presented the results to clinicians, and they asked them what diagnosis they should be most concerned about for suicide, for risk of suicide.
Yeah.
What diagnosis do you think it is?
I don't know.
Do we have candidates? Can this be multiple choice?
Sure. A is depression. B is substance use disorder. C is anxiety. And D is PTSD.
Is E, all of the above, an option?
No, it's one diagnosis. That's the biggest risk for
Brett. Let's
people
make
with
Brett
substance use
answer.
Disorder are 2 times as likely to die by suicide than the typical person. But actually, anxiety is the one that's proven to be the riskiest.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
A powerful motivator. And people that are depressed tend to not have the motivation to plan or to, take action as much. So anxiety is the one that they tell clinicians to be.
And I think that's right. And anxiety is an older concept than psychology. So anxiety is originally a philosophical concept that comes out of the philosopher Kierkegaard, who talks about anxiety is a fundamental imbalance within a person. It's an imbalance between, what's the way to put this? He thinks it's a spiritual imbalance in a kind of way. And anxiety, gets picked up by psychology, and it's anxiety is kind of a whole world view for somebody like Kierkegaard. It's a living attitude. It's a way of being in the world. And now we talk about it as this diagnosis, which in some ways I think doesn't get at the complexity in which anxiety is just going to run through so many of our life's activities, and the ways in which anxiety is also, I think, a gendered diagnosis as well. I mean, aren't more girls or women diagnosed with anxiety than men? And I'm not sure whether that's because there might be more shame for men with a diagnosis of anxiety or depression, or whether girls and women are doing a lot of the kind of social and emotional labor that is the fertilizer for anxiety growing in certain kinds of ways. I don't know. But what anecdotally I see so many more young women diagnosed with anxiety than young men. So, I mean, I'm curious, Ashley, what do you think?
I think that it might be the way it presents, just like ADHD is harder to diagnose in women because it doesn't look the same. I think that if you think, I live in Florida and we're a little more conservative and a little bit behind some of the other, states. And so, men take on the role of having to support the family, or in construction, like say construction industry, the males put so much pressure on themselves, and then they have to be the man of the family, and they have to be tough, and they can't struggle. So they might not show that they're anxious the same way a woman would, but I don't think that it's less common in men.
Yeah. I mean, I fear that's probably right. I didn't think there was a better or worse answer, like what would be better. But it just seems that paying attention to these diagnoses and even how they're understood and then how they manifest is important, particularly as it relates to addiction, because I think there are so many gendered dimensions to addiction that kind of travel underneath the surface unless you pay enough attention to them.
Well,
I think Pamela really raised a strong point here. She said the thing about being diagnosed is just that more women are going for help. So it's like that's just what we know about, right?
So I mean, if you look at different industries, some of these male-dominated industries have very high rates of suicide. So I think it probably is what she's saying. They're not going for help, or it manifests differently. Men tend to talk less than women. Women do, like, this is, I'm not trying to put anybody in a box. I'm just saying generally, we will talk about things, or even with our friends, we get a little deeper than sometimes guys do. So maybe it's able to be, if your friend says, hey, maybe you should go see someone, it sounds like you're having some anxiety. Well, a guy might not say that to his friend.
I'll tell you this. I have generalized anxiety disorder, and I am not ashamed of it.
You're awesome, though. You're just awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I get to kind of understand about all of this is being on both sides of gender. I can tell there's a very significant difference in feelings pre my transition, testosterone, and there was a different way of expressing that. It was completely different. And I've noticed that during transition, and as my body takes on, more testosterone, I have found myself carrying more of a load without saying anything. And there just becomes this place that you stay at, when you are, as supporting the family. And there's just a way that you there's just this level that you kind of stay at on that male side. And I think that you're making a valid point in that it doesn't present the same, because I think some men don't even realize they are living under pure anxiety, in pure survival mode too. And I think that everything, the issue with all of it is everything we've said here tonight is a contributing factor, there's so many tentacles to this thing. But I just wanted to throw in that there's definitely a difference hormonally, because I can say for me from a pure place that it's not, I wasn't raised in this certain way. Now, I was raised watching the men in my family, you know what I mean? So I don't know if some of that came as well, but I just have seen it be a gradual change in that. And I think that it's valuable for men, who are out there and supporting families with young families to start checking in with their bodies, just, at different times of the day, kind of just stop and check in with yourself on, where are you? Because so many times in the middle of that work day, you're so tight thinking about everything. And that's pure anxiety. You're thinking about the bills, and am I going to make enough this week? And is my body going to hold up to this week's pressure and all of the things, that I think that if men would begin to sometimes just check in with themselves, and just say, hey, where am I? And take that breath and give yourself that moment. It's tough over time.
I find this fascinating that you are in the unique position where you can actually speak to both genders and their experience.
It's quite fascinating. I didn't expect it to be this different. There are some things that I kind of miss. There are some things about the ability to relate on certain levels that I have to try harder now to do. there's a difference in, in empathy and the, the willingness that I run towards vulnerability, and I don't have to, now it's more of a conscious effort,
Yeah.
It's probably why I'm so vulnerable, just because I just want to make a conscious effort.
Well, and that's the thing too, dude. That's key, because even now, I'm almost 7 years clean. It's like still I can feel that it's going against my instincts to hold myself accountable, to be out there with my emotions, right? Like I need to push through that and do it anyway. Unless I want to cheat myself, right?
Yeah,
that's
the
and
point.
I've found that if I do those things, that I'm in a better place, spiritually, just in general, in a much better place. So, you have to be willing to get uncomfortable.
I think it's important to note too that a lot of people think if they go and get help or they go and talk to someone, then that means they have to take medication. And there's nothing wrong with taking medication if that's what you need to do. But there's also, especially anxiety, there's a lot of things that you can do where medication might not be even needed. I mean, 30 days of mindfulness shows to have the same results as benzos. So like for anxiety. So it might just be practices that you put into your life to help. And if you go and look for those solutions and talk to somebody, you might be able to find those things. So I think,
yeah.
I think it gets really interesting too, that sort of who's prescribing most of the psychiatric medications are not psychiatrists, but they're general practitioners or their emergency department physicians. And both of those groups will say, we're not the experts here, but these are their patients who come in. And what's really tough, with the emergency department kind of functioning as the primary care for so many people. I mean, we're seeing the acute mental health crises in young people where parents who are just absolutely at their wits' ends or they're terrified are going to EDs and getting psychiatric medications, but the follow-up treatment rates are so low. So those kinds of other practices and treatment modalities that Ashley's referencing, most people probably don't even know they exist or wouldn't even know where to begin, how to tap into them. And then there's the whole question of, well, how do you pay for these things? And, psychiatry is at an interesting point. I mean, the history of psychiatry is fascinating because for so long it was dominated by Freudian psychoanalysis. And it wasn't until you start hitting the 70s and 80s that you've got the rise of pharmacology. So the first line treatment is medication now, where other treatment modalities are ancillary. Instead of before, it was, talk therapy, different kinds of behavioral management, anger management, behavior modification. And now all of that is kind of secondary. And so, thinking about the role of these heavy duty pharmaceuticals in everyday life for everyone, we are a highly medicated society. And that's not to slam the medications, because some of them are very good and work to very good effect. But you really do have to be so proactive and have a quarterback of your mental health plan. And that's a lot of what's missing in the US healthcare system. And then you layer on a substance disorder with that, either as cause or consequence. And then you've got this complicated situation where it isn't really clear where you should start. Yeah. And what medications do you continue? Do you add meds? Do you take away meds? And some meds have a very long, weaning process that you want to be very careful how you go off them. And all these complexities. And here we are, people in the world just sometimes trying to get by, muddling along is the victory.
Well, the sad thing is the quality of care, like kind of what you're saying. It's people are going to the emergency room and they're not getting quality psychiatric care, not because people are not wanting to give it to them, but just lack of access or lack of knowing where to go. And I mean, the research is amazing. Like there's a book called Healing by Dr. Inzel. And I mean, if you look at this stuff there, the medications for schizophrenia are more effective than heartburn medication. It's less people react to heartburn medication than react to this one medication for schizophrenia. Like, he shows it in his book, the different medications. But how many people are going to a psychiatrist that really can diagnose that knows it early enough, and who can tell their symptoms in a way that the doctor would even understand? Because when you're in a crisis, it always makes sense on what's going on. And
I know a lot of people that literally can't like even bring forth enough energy to like try to describe, because they feel so insecure about their ability to like articulate their feelings. It's tough.
I remember I talk about this a lot, but when I first got into recovery, and I talked to the doctor, and I was like, I don't know if it's depression or if it's bipolar. I feel like sometimes my brain is overactive, but I'm not like manic. And she's like, well, I'm going to give you this medication, and you'll know in about a week if you have mania, then you've got bipolar. And if you don't, then it's depression. And I'm like, okay, so that's how we do this, huh? That's how, SSRIs tend to cause mania in people with bipolar disorder. And so I didn't end up manic. So they're like, okay, that's not it. But that's kind of the trial and error part of life. But I don't know if any of you have ever seen anyone in a manic episode. It's to put someone in that just as a trial. It's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's a necessary evil, they call that.
Well, I know that my wife, when she came into recovery, wanted to not be on dope anymore, but she had no idea how to even begin to start to unravel, the deeper roots to that. And as she kept going back to the doctor, it was, I need help with depression. My mind won't stop at night. And before it was over with, at the peak of this 7-year period where my wife was just a shell of a human being, like every night I'd go to bed, I'd be afraid she was going to die in her sleep. And we weren't sleeping together at the time, and I was afraid I wasn't going to be there. I mean, she was so medicated that she could not sit down and have a conversation because she would fall right asleep. Her legs were swollen to the point that they were purple all of the time. And here's this, this woman, and she's just trying to not feel depressed, trying to not feel this. And she just took what they gave her. And at one point I counted 13 of the 23 medications all caused drowsiness.
Wow.
And it was no wonder that my wife would fall asleep doing the dishes. And so, and it wasn't until one of the side effects, gave her Seroquel, high doses of Seroquel over time, damaged her heart, and she had this slight heart attack, which completely brought her back to herself and to us as her family, because she knew that it was this lifestyle over time, and she didn't want to die. And that was her moment, that moment that almost broke her became the moment that helped her, come completely off of all of those medications. And, it's only been January of 2020 is when she had the heart episode. And, I watch her struggle sometimes still, but I see her taking such an active and proactive approach into her own mental health and her own health care as a whole, that at least I know, she's more than likely going to be there when I wake up in the morning now.
Thank God for that. Thank God for that moment.
I know. I know. But the medication was ridiculous.
And it's so hard for all of us to challenge medical authority, though. I know I get to the doctor's office, and it's like I can't say anything when,
Yeah.
you know, you did this, do that, you need this, or I'm like, okay. In just about any other area of my life, I would stand up for myself and push back and be an advocate for myself. And
Right.
I just become like, okay, just drive over me. Oh, you want to back over me again? Sure, fine. I mean, I just do it. And I feel like I need to have someone to come in and be my advocate, because it's so hard for any one of us to do it on our own when we're sitting there in those little Johnnies and just feeling so vulnerable and scared anyway. And
Well,
so,
I think
you get all these medications, you don't know what the hell they do, but you think, oh, I'm supposed to take them.
Yep.
Right. If I go to a doctor, which is rare, go figure, but when I do, I'm seeking answers. And I think that I just only can speak for myself, but maybe it's like this trust thing, you know, it's like they're a doctor, they're the doctor, right? Like they'll be able to tell me what's going on and they can fix it, you know, like that's why you go. So I think we just assume that they have done their due diligence and that they know what's really going on, or you know, like we just have this like immediate like trust or something. I don't know if that makes any sense.
And that's something they're working on actually at a federal level. They're trying to integrate peers into primary care, and then they're also trying to integrate it into where there's already integration with primary care and behavioral health, so like community behavioral health centers and stuff like that. So that would maybe help in these situations, because they would talk to you before you visit. They would go with you to see the doctor because they would be able to tell them, you know, get to know you a little better and your symptoms. But just having that person there that, you know, has been, you know, through a mental health struggle or a substance use struggle, so they know what it feels like to be in that seat, you know, there to support, I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's tough. So, I don't know. I hurt my back, hurt my hip, hurt something badly, and ended up in the doctor's office. And he prescribed muscle relaxants. And I said, well, you know, I am in recovery. I'm not sure I really want to be taking these. He said, oh, just don't abuse them. It's like, now what part?
Sorry.
You know, so I took one because spasming badly, and you know, it's sudden. And then the next day I took a second one and I thought, no, I like this, because I felt almost like there was this shimmering little veil between me and reality, and it was shimmering nicely. Now I was on the other side and I thought, oh no, you don't. But you know, my physician was not going to help me, even though I kind of stood up for myself. I mean, so then it becomes, you know, do you have friends that say to you, no, Peg, you don't want to be taking those? Or, you know, why are you taking those? I mean, it shouldn't be a matter of luck in healthcare that we have physicians who understand addiction. And
Yes.
I think a goodly number do, but some still have that attitude of, well, just like mine, well, just don't abuse them. Okay.
You know, so very smart people, which doctors are, they're very, very smart. They go to school for a long time, are more analytical, and sometimes they don't have the best soft skills in linking to that empathy and being able to understand, not that they're not great people, but they're just more of those analytical minds, like where you get like social workers and therapists that are better with those soft skills and recognize those things. I think it's almost like a personality difference on if you could put a therapist and a doctor together,
Right.
like the perfect person, because they would
Freaky
empathize.
Friday.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So true.
I
Sup,
think
Brad?
that there's a lot
Hi,
to
guys.
there's a lot of benefits that come from having that kind of a well-rounded care team as opposed to one person, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they should be intimately like connected, or you know, like working together closely, because I know like it's completely different kind of path or whatever from what we're talking about. But like when my mom was going through her cancer, she had, you know, all these different doctors and they were never on the same page. You know, it's like, why can't they work together. And then I think it would have been great if there was like peers around who had been through or were currently going through the same thing. But then I don't know. It's maybe it could have helped her stay more hopeful or something.
Well, and I think we forget. So we can have this care team that's great, and you can have somebody that's specialties here, and you can have someone that's specialties here. Then you sometimes when they're so specialized, you get these gaps, and having somebody that's not clinical as part of the team to be able to fill in those gaps is really, really important.
Because you may be treating a medical condition, but ultimately you're treating a person. And medical condition and person are two very different kinds of things. So, I mean, yes, I appreciate specialized medical care and those who could, operate on some tiny little important organ like the brain. Yay! But to also understand that you're just not treating the brain, you're treating the person.
Right.
And it seems one of those statements that's so obvious, I can't believe I just uttered it. But it does have to be uttered.
Or that it's going to blow people's minds to hear sometimes because it's like, that's genius. Yeah, well, it should be common sense.
Well, person-centered care is supposed to be the model that you get, and that's definitely not the model we have right now.
No.
Yeah, and we also, we're getting to learn more and more how our emotional and internal life affects our physical life and our physical well-being. And, I think that if the body and the mind and all of that is one, then it would be great if it was more one. Because I just always trusted that, doctors were communicating with each other. And it does seem like that, Jason, until somebody gets, in your family kind of gets sick, you think, well, why isn't everybody working together? I just thought that would naturally be the way it would go. Like, I see this is a person who has 4 different doctors. It would behoove everyone, to talk to everyone. The body's so connected.
Right.
But it's amazing how it doesn't happen that way.
Well, and I think technology gets in the way at times because all of our records can go into that one thing that I dread more than anything, the portal. When a physician or nurse says to me, oh, well, you can get access to this information through the portal, I think, oh, shit, it's not going to work. And we assume, though, that because the information, we assume, one, that all the information is there. And the second assumption is that they actually read it and then look across and see. Because where I have found just terrible things happening is with prescriptions. Where you've got one physician writing the prescription for this and another writing it for that. And if you don't have a good pharmacist who raises a flag and says, these things are contraindicated, or, with my mother, they put her on a medication that should never be given to anyone over the age of 65 who has heart problems or has, peripheral neuropathy. Well, they put her on this and she was out where the buses don't run after one pill. Wow. And it was the pharmacist who's like, she never should have been given this. So there's just so many places where things can go wrong. And I think then you layer on the complexities of addiction as a medical condition as well. I mean, we see it as, yes, it's this kind of disorder, but it's a medical condition of what is happening with our guts, what's happening with our brain, what is happening with our nervous system. I mean, everything. Yeah. It is all connected. So that maybe just goes back to Ashley's point about kind of a holistic person-centered approach. Yeah. But as we talk more and more, addiction is a brain disease, which has been part of the language of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. As a brain disease, it's like, I, Peg O'Connor, am not an addicted brain. I, Peg O'Connor, am an addicted person. And they're two radically different things, to come back to that statement of the obvious again.
There's this new model that comes with, so it used to be addiction was a choice. And then it moved to addiction was a disease. And now it's more, and a lot of people's, it's not everybody, but, addiction is a maladaptive coping mechanism for And to me, that fits for me personally better, that I use substances as a coping mechanism because you use a behavior that works.
Right. Well, they were the solution, right? I'd say it all the time when I share my story that drugs probably saved my life, for a time when I was younger. And then, that they stopped being fun and it took a weird turn and things got strange. And they just got worse from there. So, I mean, nobody tells you when they're like, here, this will help, try this. Nobody tells you that shit's going to stop working down the road. Mm-hmm. It's going to make you get really twisted and weird.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing to think about is, have you ever seen someone that's having bad stomach problems? They're throwing up, they're having, diarrhea, they're having stomach cramps, and they swear that there's something wrong with their stomach. They go to the doctor, there's nothing wrong with their stomach. They go to the next doctor. This one must have missed something. Something's wrong with my stomach. And it turns out it was anxiety or headaches. People start getting headaches all the time, real bad migraines. They think something's wrong, and something is wrong. I'm not saying it's not, but that can be stress. That can be lots of things.
Yeah. Well, and in senior populations too, the ways in which alcohol can wreak such havoc on seniors because of metabolism, body composition, what it can do to blood. So seniors who are on, say, Coumadin, a blood thinner, and they're drinking a lot, that could cause a lot of problems. Or seniors are having trouble cognitively functioning the same way. It's tempting to write it on, well, that's just aging. Well, drinking a half bottle or a bottle of wine every night or several drinks. So maybe that does come down to, again, being back in that doctor's office, and how many of us would want to fess up, well, this is exactly how much we're drinking, because we all underestimated what we were drinking or using when we were doing it. And I think with older people, there's even greater shame. And what we're seeing is it's a lot of older women who are starting to drink in troubling ways. And so the way they talk about drinking in senior populations is the same language they use in talking about drinking in college students. They talk about high risk drinking. And that, high risk drinking doesn't mean, oh, you're going to become an alcoholic. It means you're drinking in ways that pose risk to your physical or your mental health. What it does to your balance, what it does to your eyesight, what it does to your cognitive function. And, having those conversations with our seniors is incredibly hard for physicians and for anyone else who works with them. But, there's a fair amount of alcohol consumption in those older populations. It's deeply worrisome.
Well, there's these two substances, alcohol and marijuana, that people think are safe because, alcohol is legal and marijuana is legal in a lot of places, or there's a medical card. And it's actually, the deaths related to alcohol have skyrocketed. Over 100,000. Yep. We talk about the opiate crisis. The alcohol crisis is very, very troubling. And then marijuana is causing people to have psychosis because there's more THC than ever before. And the younger brains, it's a lot of kids that are in these first episode psychosis units. I'm calling them kids, but they're 18 to 25.
Young adults.
Yeah. They're having psychosis because of, people that have mental health conditions are more susceptible to psychosis with marijuana. But does anybody tell them that when they get a card?
Right.
Nope. Nope.
And you don't even have to have a specific diagnosis or anything that's provable to get those cards. You can just go in and say something super vague, like I have really bad anxiety or I have chronic pain, and they will give you a card. You know what I mean? Like my ex-wife, God rest her soul, I remember when she moved to California and she was pining over me for a couple of years. She would call once in a while. She wanted me to come down there. She's like, oh, because she started like a massage therapy practice, and she was like, I got the hookup, like I can get she's like, it's super easy to get the card. And then she's like, I trade services with this dispensary in my strip mall and all this and that. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Like the damage was done, it's over. We did the whole deal. Like, let's move on. Yeah.
Well,
But
I also heard they're telling people that are on parole and stuff will go get a medical card, because then if you test positive,
it's all good.
right? So that's what their recommendation is, and how many people with mental health conditions are in jails and prisons? That's like the biggest provider for mental health services in the country. So you're giving this population, telling them to go get this card that could cause psychosis. It's absurd to me.
Right. And then all the different things, the different ways, like those waxes and the oils and stuff. Like, holy shit, man!
How potent they are! I mean,
they really
nothing like I was smoking when I was 18 or 20.
Right.
No, ma'am.
It was like 3% THC back in the day, and now it's like
it can be in the 90s in some of those concentrates.
Yeah. That's nuts. So I really want to take a moment, Peg. I want to shift gears here because you are an author of a book, and I want you to tell us about that and the inspiration behind it, and maybe what was it like writing it. Let's talk about your book for a while.
Well, that's kind of you. So this book that they're so kindly referencing is called Higher and Friendly Powers: Transforming Addiction and Suffering. And it is a book that comes from an itch that I wanted to scratch for about 38 years. So when I was a sophomore in college, I went to my first AA meeting. And as soon as I heard the language of God, I pretty much wanted to run out as if my pants were on fire. And I always struggled with the notion of higher power in recovery. And I really didn't start going to any AA meetings until I'd been sober 19 years, because I realized I needed to do some things differently in my sobriety. So one of my mantras is always, you need to be flexible and nimble in your recovery or sobriety. You can't be dogmatic about it, because one thing has worked before, it doesn't guarantee that it will work in the future. And so this book really grew out of a reference that I read of Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, referring to William James, an American philosopher, as a co-founder of AA, even though James had died 25 years before Bill Wilson had his conversion experience in 1934. So I got interested in that question and wanted to figure out, well, what exactly does that mean? And so in researching this, Bill Wilson read one of James's greatest books, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is all about the ways that spiritual impulses are part of human nature and they burn at the center of some people. And in that book, Varieties, James chronicles about 5 stories of people who had a conversion like Bill Wilson did, where suddenly his desire to drink was lifted by what he understood to be a God. And so Bill Wilson read that book shortly after he had his own experience. And higher power is a term that comes from William James, except Bill Wilson didn't get it right, according to James, that there were higher and friendly powers in the plural, and that William James says anything larger will do if it'll help you to take the next step to transform yourself. So it could be something like ideals of truth or beauty. It could be enthusiasm for humanity, moral principles, a sense of something more or something divine, or it can even be a better version of yourself. Yeah. And that higher power doesn't do anything to you, but it enables you to do things. So each of us can author his, her, or their own conversion by drawing on resources from within, or if you do happen to believe in a God of the sort that Wilson seems to have in the back of his mind, having been raised in a Calvinist tradition in Vermont, that people can make great changes in their lives. And we see that all the time. And the other inspiration was really wanting to challenge the view that everyone has to have one of those big, huge, sudden tsunami-like conversions, because William James says conversions happen all the time, gradually and slowly, and people make different choices and they end up changing what burns at their center.
Nice.
no less so than people who have those big experiences. So my hope was to write a book that people who don't believe in a Christian-centric God could maybe find something really interesting and useful in terms of thinking about perhaps living in recovery, and that those people who love AA could learn more about someone whom Bill Wilson regarded as a co-founder. So I know that that is a needle with a very small eye to thread. I'm not sure that I have. And I also just think that William James is a wonderful companion, chronicling all kinds of different kinds of suffering, because he himself suffered greatly, and the possibilities for what he calls regeneration or rejuvenation, transformation, that each of us can become a new person. So that's what was going on behind the book.
Well, that sounds wonderful.
Standing.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I'm intrigued. I want to read some of this guy's work. I think I maybe have heard of him. I don't know. Sure.
I haven't, but I definitely can't wait, because I think I just thank you for writing this book. I just thought coming in, what am I going to do? I can't do the 12-step. How am I going to do this? What am I going to do? And it was that, that aversion, that very traumatic relationship that we were talking about before we started the show, is that traumatic relationship between you and your perception of the God that you've grown up as your perception. And there's just so much different. There's so much more to you. There is so much more to everything, when you don't try to, when you don't have to box something in, and your box doesn't have to look like someone else's, and just to realize that there's a place in the world for everyone. And I appreciate you writing a book like this. I just really am. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it was really written for people like me who very early on just could not get behind that notion of God and thought, am I ever going to be able to recover? Yeah. And I guess my takeaway message is, yes, anyone can recover if there's that willingness and that desire paired with action to make changes, and to also have even just a little glimmer of what could be better about your life, or what might be a possibility for you. Because we can live our way into the answers. We can live our way into things becoming actual if we grab hold of some possibilities and begin to work with them. I think it's as basic as that.
Yeah. Well, my sponsor always says you can't think your way into right living, but you can live your way into right thinking.
Yeah, you got to have that action. Without the action, it's just kind of ornamental. It just spins but doesn't really engage with anything. But when you begin to act differently, that's when you get different results.
Yeah.
And then even like with the self-love thing, it's like, speaking of AA, you got the 9-step promises, and when you first get in recovery, or you're even seeking it or trying to find it, you're like, yeah, right. Like a lot of that stuff sounds freaking impossible, man. And I would remember, like, a couple years in, I asked him, when does the self-love piece come in? Like, I am so not there. Like, I still struggle with the shame and the guilt. And he just told me, Jason, you're doing all the right things. And he said, just keep doing what you're doing. The best way to build self-esteem is through esteemable actions. He said. So I just kept doing service, man. And over time, like you said, Peg, slowly it came, but it was very slow.
So can I read one thing that is going to really sound like the 9-step promises, and it comes from William James?
Yes, please.
And it's absolutely lovely. It's in response to, so what changes in someone who undergoes a conversion? What changes when someone's center has shifted and now burns with spiritual impulses at the center? So what happens in this process of transformation? William James writes, that whole raft of cowardly obstructions, which in tame persons in dull moods are sovereign impediments to actions, sink away at once. Our conventionality, our shyness, laziness and stinginess, our demands for precedent and permission, for guarantee and surety, our small suspicions, our timidities, despairs, where are they now? Severed like cobwebs, broken like bubbles in the sky. Thank you, William James.
Wow.
That's
There are the 9-step promises right there.
It's very descriptive language. I love
Wow.
it. Very imagined, like visual. I'm like that. Like I got a vivid imagination, and I've always found like visualization techniques and meditation and whatnot to be very helpful for me when I'm struggling with something. So it's like I can almost visualize it to break. Yeah, like I could visualize.
There goes that worry. Poof.
Yeah.
There goes that insecurity. Poof. It's gone.
Well,
like I said, thank you, William James. That's not Peg O'Connor. That was Peg O'Connor citing William James, William James, if you tear a page of his writing, it'll bleed because he's just so infused in his work. And that's why he's just so wonderful to read. So that's my recommendation for reading is William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience. It's a treat. It's huge, but it's a treat.
Well, thank you.
I love it.
So I'm willing to bet that Peg O'Connor's got some pretty mind-blowing quotes or excerpts. Do you have something in mind you could share with us? Something that's your original?
That's my original. Hold on, let me see if I can find something here. On the spot. Yeah. I'll be like David Bowie and Queen, Under Pressure.
Dun, 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 dun.
That is just one of the best songs ever.
I saw Foo Fighters do a cover of it a couple of years ago, and it was super awesome. I went because my co-host on my podcast, the Way Out podcast, he had an extra ticket and invited me. And I was not a big Foo Fighters fan before that show, but they put on an amazing show, and now I'm a fan.
Okay, so I found something to read. And for me, I want to really have a living attitude of gratitude and not grievance, because oftentimes when I was drinking, I was just full of grievances. Like, why are my siblings getting this? Or, why, call the wambulance. So that's from my friend Mary Beth, by the way, the wambulance. I love it. So
you want some
here's
French fries? How about a wine again?
There you go. So this is me on grateful people. Grateful people see plenitude where others might see scarcity. While realities and actualities present challenges, they also present opportunities. Some of these opportunities may be unwanted, but there they are. So a person may be grateful for an opportunity, even if it doesn't pan out for her in the way she hoped. She also may be grateful for the opportunity to reach for something she had never considered. Operating from gratitude may enable a person to take some risks in the knowledge that she may not get what she wants. She may have confidence in herself that she'll be okay with whatever happens. And in the process, she may gain good experience that will serve her well later and help her achieve new goals. Gratitude enables a person to be more willing to live on possibilities and maybes and take actions where the results are uncertified. Gratitude expands a person's world, making it possible to have contact with something more or something bigger. So that was
me.
That's a Peg O'Connor right there.
Yeah.
So gratitude expands you. It expands the world. It makes connections where there weren't any before. And, the reality check for me, the check I give myself is if I do start getting in that, wambulance mood, I think, why am I acting this way? I have so much for which I ought to be grateful. And so then I got to make sure I don't just, beat myself up over that, because that's just an old habit. But to say, okay, now how does this new awareness make me change my actions?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that as well, that's your instant response is that self-introspection, because typically when I'm doing the same thing, tool that I learned that works great is, to make a gratitude list, because then you flip your perspective. I remember that I get to have these problems today, right? These problems are so much different than the ones I would be dealing with if I was still in active use, and I know like, another thing that I was taught is that we're only responsible for the effort, not the outcome. And that the idea of recovery is to get to a place where you will be okay regardless of the outcome, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that kind of security, to know that I will be okay. Even if I
Yeah.
can't imagine what that okayness looks like, that I will be okay. So what I know about myself, I'll make a reference to gymnastics, even though I have never been a gymnast in my entire life because I'm a big girl. But I know that I will not always stick the landing. I know I may not always land on my feet. I may land flat on my ass. But what I know is that I will get up, not because of my superheroic strength, but one, I know how to ask for help. I know how to put my hand out, and I'll get up and I will be okay. And
Yes.
sometimes, always, I guess I would say, never mind, sometimes being okay, what an absolute victory. It doesn't mean I don't feel pain. It doesn't mean I don't suffer. It doesn't mean bad things that happen. No, all of that happens. That's part of what it means to be human. It would be unnatural to hope that they didn't happen or do everything in your power to make sure they didn't happen. But I will be okay. And that, for me, is something that I have to tether myself to at times when things are really, really rough. I'm okay.
Yes.
I will be okay. I will
Yes.
be okay. That I will be okay is as real as anything else, including that fear. I mean, to know that you'll be okay is one way to counter that fear thought that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You don't, I don't know why, but you just reminded me of this. So I pulled it up. I'm going to read it. This is Theodore Roosevelt. He said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best in the end knows triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat."
Yeah.
So it's like that bravery. And what gives you that bravery, right? It's that gratitude. It's that delayed gratification that you've gotten from continuing to try and not give up, you know?
Yeah. And trying to be sober is an act of bravery.
Yes.
Living in recovery is a whole series of acts of bravery. It takes courage to say, I'm going to look at these things head on. I'm not going to numb. I'm not going to try to escape. I'm not going to try to deny them, but I am actually going to try to meet reality.
Yeah.
And respond to it and not just react to it, because there's a world of difference between reacting and responding. And
Yes.
in recovery, we learn how to respond, not just react.
And it is a world, it is a whole, like, it's thing after thing. It's a total journey to harness and cultivate those skills. I think it's important to know that, you know, it takes a lot of guts, and then to sustain recovery in a society that's so escapist, where it's like against the grain not to drink, you know, it's against the grain maybe not to smoke weed or whatever. So to be able to say no and you know, and stand by your convictions with that is hard sometimes.
Yep.
It's good.
Y'all, my computer's about to die, so before it does, when it
That's
does,
the message from the universe then.
it has been awesome to share
it's
this
been great.
space
Thank
with
you, all
Peg.
of you.
This is
Thank
awesome,
you
y'all.
for having this wonderful Thursday night session. What a great thing for the
It has been awesome, and
I love you guys.
We had so many squirrel moments and sidebars, and we really delved into some stuff that probably none of us thought we would even talk about tonight.
That's the fun part of it, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Gratitude for all of you.
And you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Yes, this was awesome.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you, Peg. Really,
pleasure. Pleasure's all mine.
You got to catch the replay,
that's
Brett.
why you. Yeah, that's why you.
Oh, I'm going to. I'm definitely going to.
I know.
This is awesome.
That's your cue, big boy.
Take it over, bud. Don't let me miss this part. Get to it.
I'm getting it.
I love it.
It's all
love
you.
it.
Banger.
Thank you guys for everybody that tuned in tonight. If you are watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on your notifications so you know when we go live, which is every Thursday night. I'm going to go out of order because Elsie's computer's about to die. Elsie, you want to tell us about your show?
Absolutely. This is nourishment for the recovering and rediscovering soul. Turn into the Recovery Soul Food Podcast every Saturday night live at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.
Nice.
Good job.
Jason, you want to tell us about your show?
What's up? Yeah, I'm Jason. I'm also the co-host of the Way Out podcast. Me and my friend Charles LeVar bring it to you every week, and it's we share powerful recovery stories and recovery power topics to help you find or jumpstart your own recovery. And then we also have a playlist exclusively on Spotify. It is songs that symbolize recovery to all of our amazing guests. So check it out.
Woohoo!
Noise. I also do a podcast as well, Recovery Survey, and I have an upcoming episode with Peg coming out in a couple weeks. That's actually how we connected. I met her through Janine from the Chasing Heroin podcast. She was on there, and I texted her as soon as I finished listening to that episode, and I was like, you gotta hook me up with Peg. Like, the episode on Chasing Heroin blew my mind, and I got her email address, and then we did an interview, and then I was like, let's get Peg on the live stream because we got to get more Peg. So that's kind of how that happened. So stay tuned for that because I have an interview coming up with her, and I'm really excited about that. We also started a new thing called the Recovery Revolution Podcast Network, and currently we have 19 or 20 different recovery shows that have all come together, and we're promoting each other and help each other, and it's really crazy because I didn't think it was going to blow up like that, but we have a Facebook page, we have a Instagram page, there's a website, so search for that. If you're listening to this in the podcast form, there will be a little clickable link, and we do release this broadcast tonight as a podcast as well, so here in a couple hours, whenever I get it put together, it'll go out and you guys can listen to the audio version as well, or you can find the video replay on Facebook or YouTube. So I think that is everything. So thank you guys for coming and watching or listening tonight. Thank you, Peg, for coming on the show. I'm super bummed that I was only here for a few minutes and I was running late from work, and then technical difficulties with my computer and all kinds of crazy crap, but I'm glad that I got to catch the end of it, and I'm so grateful that you were able to come on the show tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. We will see you guys next Thursday night with another guest. Until then, remember, progress, not perfection.